Hey, thanks for checking out Nuts and Bolts with Tone. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk about a 6.7 Powerstroke and transmission removal. So in this video, I'll show you how to remove the transmission. I'll walk you through all the steps it's going to take to do it. It's not difficult. It's just that most of them are four-wheel drive, and the transmission and transfer case are very large and very heavy. So it's very difficult. Make sure you strap this transmission to the jack before you take it out. I use two different straps in the front and the rear just to make darn sure that it doesn't fall when I'm taking it out. It's not a difficult job. It's just, although it's not super time consuming. I mean, I think it's like an 8-hour job to do it. Book time is 8 hours. You should be able to do it in way less than, you should be able to get it out in way less than 4 hours. Even if you've never done one before, it's not that hard to do. And so let's get into it. All right, here we go. First step in taking out the transmission for this 2011 6.7 Powerstroke to replace the upper oil pan is disconnect your batteries, take out your dipsticks. You only have to take out the transmission dipstick if you're only removing the transmission. If you're doing the upper oil pan, pull out the oil dipstick so it's not sticking out, causing you grief. And also disconnect the bolts there. There's 2 bolts for the different dipsticks so they can move around while you have the vehicle in the air. The oil dipstick goes through the rear engine cover, so you won't really pull that one out, but the transmission dipstick, which is that top bolt right there, take that one out so it can move around and allow you some leeway while you're doing this. All right, let's get these out and get it up in the air. Also drain the engine coolant. Take your cap off, go down here, and your petcock is right there to drain your primary cooling system, because you got to take off a coolant hose to the oil cooler. Well, you got to disconnect both of them to the oil cooler. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take off this, you're going to take off the oil filter, and you're going to take off the oil filter housing. And there's 5 or 6 bolts, and one of them is studded. Keep in mind where the stud goes, and then you're going to take out the starter. You're going to disconnect and remove both of the drive lines. So I always mark the drive lines so I know where they go, just to make sure there's no vibration issues. In some of these, this is a fixed yoke and you have to unbolt the yoke. In this one, it's a slip yoke, so I don't have to. It's going to slip right out. In this case, I'm going to drain the transfer case so I don't have to worry about this fluid. I'm also going to, I'm going to leave the transmission full. You're going to unbolt the cooler lines right here. And then there's also, you're going to have to undo this to do the job. But there's also a nut right there, and I believe there's one more nut along the oil pan that you got to take off, and that allows you to be able to move this cooler line assembly around. You got to take this off to do the upper oil pan. But if you're not doing the upper oil pan, you still want to move that, because then you have room to move this out of the way to get your transmission out. And you're also going to unbolt your dipstick right there and take your dipstick out. You're going to disconnect those 2 bolts right there and take that shift bracket off. Pop it off of here. Don't worry about this nut. Just pop the connection there. You're going to undo the electrical connector here. You're going to have to unfasten all of the electrical connector and fuel lines from the top of the transmission. You got the transfer case connector for the transfer case shifter, because it's electronic, and the shift and the actuator. You're going to disconnect all those electrical connectors and make sure that the harness is free. Once you've done all of that, you're going to put a jack under this transmission, and you're going to leave the transfer case attached. It's going to be really heavy. So what I did on the last one was I put a pole jack right here, supported the transfer case, while I took this bracket off right here. And then I put my transmission jack from this part of the oil of the pan back here to distribute the weight. I think I went from here and I put a block of wood right here on the upper flat part. I'll show you when I put the jack on it to get it down. And then you're gonna unbolt all the bolts. 2, 4, 6, I think there's 12. And there's 6 torque converter nuts that you have to take off. All right, let's get to it. Okay, so one little tip that I like to do is these 6.7s, the wheel well is super easy to come out. It's got some 5.5 millimeters here, 2 8s right there, and an 8 there, and an 8 there. Pull this out, take the wheel off, and then you can get right here, and then the starter is really easy to disconnect. You can even grab that bolt right there, and then that way you can get to it easier. So, while I have this off, so here's the oil filter housing. You got an 8mm bolt, 8mm bolt, 8mm bolt, and an 8mm bolt right there. This is a 10mm stud with a 10mm nut. So right there, so you got to take off the nut and pull the bracket away. That is the cables for the starter. So once you get that pulled away, use a screwdriver, pry it away, and then you can get this stud out. Make sure you put this stud back in that position. All right. Okay, 2 things I forgot to tell you is disconnect this electrical connector and disconnect this electrical connector before you take that off. The starter, you have 1 bolt that comes in through the bell housing, and then 2 bolts that are on the engine side. 13mm, all of them. And then this is a 10mm nut and a 15mm nut. That's how you get the starter out, and it comes out the bottom. Okay, so for the torque converter bolts, after you take the starter out, you have this little plastic guy here, and this sits back in the starter hole like that, up against the engine block. And you just pop it out. These are 2 plastic clips. Just pop this guy out here. And then what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna have an 18mm 12 point. And it works really good if you just have it on like a little 1-inch 3/8 extension. And so right here, just a flexible 3/8, like 18-inch long ratchet will fit right up inside the balancer for the front bolts. And then all you need is a 15mm, use a 15mm deep socket and a long neck 3/8 ratchet, and it'll break all those torque converter nuts loose and take them right out. Now, we're going to unbolt the transmission and get ready to take it out. That's the torque converter bolts. Oh, and also, there's 8 of them. So there's 8 nuts. I thought there was only 6. I might have said 6 earlier, but there's 8. And let's go. All right, transmission is out. Okay, so a couple things that you need to watch for is you have this bracket right here. There's 2 bolts that sit up at the right there and right there. You just have to lift this bracket up. I always lift it up and let it sit on top of the transmission, so when you pull the transmission out, it just falls behind it. Not really a whole lot to it. You just got your dowel pins, you got your flex plate. You got to make sure you put this on the right way. There's a dowel, and the dowel is right there. You can mess up the dowel, so you have to. What you want to do is make sure you put your flex plate on and run a bolt in all the way so it's up flush. So that way you don't take any chances on mushrooming that dowel pin, because that would be bad news for you. Not a whole lot to it. You got you got 4 bolts along the bottom of the oil pan, and then up around the edge it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4 on each side. So not too bad. Here we go right here. So there's the transmission. So you got the vent tube for the transfer case, comes up here, and it just loops around. And then there's the transmission vent. You don't even have to touch anything. Just put a couple straps on this sucker because it is heavy. I got a strap there and a strap there. So hopefully this is gonna go back up before I have to move this jack. Luckily we have 2 transmission jacks. So the other thing is that so here's your bolt for your dipstick right here, and then here's your bolt for your cooler lines. So I just stick a couple plugs in there because it's just gonna keep trickling on your head and it's annoying. Then you got your drain, your dipstick tube. You just pop that up, and that actually stayed up with the car. And I'm actually gonna try to leave it there. So there's the dipstick tube. You just have the one bolt there and then the one bolt up top. That's about it for the transmission. Not too much else. Pretty simple. All right, well, let's get this upper oil pan done and get this back in. Okay, so I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope it aided you in showing you the tips and tricks to removing a transmission in a 6.7 Powerstroke. To do the reason that I'm removing this transmission is I'm doing an upper oil pan, and to do an upper oil pan, you need to remove the transmission first. So that is the first thing you need to do. So that's what this video is about. So I also will have another video on the upper oil pan. So if you're doing an upper oil pan, you can watch these back to back. I'll show you how to do the whole thing start to finish. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell. You get notified of all my future content, which you're definitely going to want to see. Also, check me out on Instagram at Nuts and Bolts with Tone, the daily life as a mechanic. I appreciate you watching the video. We'll see you next time.